All right, welcome back. I'm Madonna from Gathering Folds, and today we're talking about the hexagons and triangles threefold tiling. So I'm going to illustrate that with a folding tutorial, but when I talk about tilings, I'm talking about ways that shapes are connected, which is a category. So a particular way that shapes are connected is a category that fits multiple different origami tessellations, and often quite a few different origami tessellations. So when I say hexagons and triangles threefold, I mean an arrangement of hexagon and triangle twists, where the hexagons are in a position of maximum threefold rotational symmetry. What that means is that functionally we are subdividing a triangle grid or triangle tiling into a hexagon on the inside and triangles in the corners, and then having that set of tiles repeat to fill the space. So we're going to end up with 6 of these meta triangles going around the center, and therefore 6 of what's in their corners, those triangle twists, being clustered in the center of the paper. Now, before I start folding, I want to tell you a little bit about the grid. This is a diagonal grid, so my grid lines are perpendicular to the edge of the paper. You can see that I do in fact have a right angle where my grid meets the edge. I also have some other angles, but the right angle is the one that we really care about because that's the one that goes through the center of the paper. And so when we're setting up these grids, we want to fold our half lines so that one point of the paper meets the opposite point. And I'm being more careful, using more references, using these other corners to make sure they're in line before I fold all the way through. And I have a more in-depth tutorial on this diagonal grid in Tessellation Foundations that y'all can check out. And once I have the 3 directions of grid, then I can decide how many divisions do I want to do. And the key thing with this particular grid that I'll be working with today is it has 48 divisions counted on a grid line that goes through the center. So you would do thirds just like you would do thirds on any other triangle by bringing a corner of the triangle up to another corner of the triangle, finding a pinch point at the center of that grid triangle. You don't see the third side of the triangle because we don't really have enough references to fold it cleanly yet. And then likewise, I'd bring another corner up to the edge and down. And again, this process of dividing in thirds is also something that I teach in Tessellation Foundations. And for this, I would then bring the center point up to the intersection of pinch points to start my thirds. If I wanted to do halves on this grid, I would take these 2 grid intersections at the edge of the paper, which you don't actually see more grid lines going into them at this point, but we're taking that as a definition. So in order to divide this distance in half, we need to take this point up to the center line. And likewise on this side, specifically not taking this distance in half, the corner of the triangle to the center. That's actually what you would do in the case with thirds. So welcome everyone. Hi Erla, glad you could join us. And let's get started on folding this pattern. So this is actually the oldest pattern that has been folded in this tiling. I call it Disintegration. I'm not sure exactly what Shuzo Fujimoto called it when he first came up with it back in the probably 70s. But what we're going to do is start by finding the center of the paper. So I'm going to fold in half. But yet this pattern does date all the way back to Fujimoto. And that means that we're using only closed triangle and closed hexagon twists, because those, all of the folding that I've seen from Fujimoto only uses closed hexagon, closed triangle, closed square. So you never see a Fujimoto pattern with rhombus twists or open hexagon twists or anything like that. Welcome, Chris. Glad you could join us. So I've found the center of the paper and marked it. Now we can zoom in on that. And one of the things about this tiling, two of the patterns from Advent of Tess 2024 used the same tiling. That would be building blocks and strewn about. And we're going to start the same way as building blocks, actually. So this is a tutorial that's very useful if you want to fold more repeats of building blocks and strewn about. And this one is a lot simpler, both because it doesn't use any hybrid twists and because all the twists are actually on one side of the paper. Yeah, Early, that's a great point. This diagonal grid is a simple case of a generally rotated grid, which is what I commonly use with my origami tessellations to get the border to match up with where the twists end when I stop folding. For this particular pattern, it's going to fit perfectly on this perpendicular grid. And one of the key giveaways that a perpendicular grid is a good thing to have is that the pattern uses mirror symmetries. So anytime you have, like, let's say an equilateral triangles pattern or hexagons and triangles threefold pattern or heck, a square tiling pattern, the square grid is already perpendicular to the edges. But anytime you have a triangle grid pattern that uses mirror symmetries, that's a pretty dead giveaway that you're going to want a perpendicular grid to have a even border as you go across an edge. So what I just drew on is the mountain folds for the 6 central equilateral triangles. And it doesn't really matter at this stage whether this one in particular is right-handed or the other one is right-handed. We're just going to pick one. And by the way that I drew this is a length 2 hexagon around the center point with these little legs popping off from that hexagon. So I'm going to pick one corner of that hexagon and fold a closed triangle twist using those mountain folds. So if I was doing this without drawing on the paper, I would want to know where's the center and then come 2 spaces out on the grid line coming to the center and put my 3-way intersection of mountain folds. And I'm making this one right-handed kind of arbitrarily. Like I mentioned before, we're going to have mirror symmetries in this pattern, so it doesn't matter if I start with a right-handed or a left-handed twist. And press just outside of the twist corners to squash, and use the bone folder to get it nice and smooth. So now I'm going to rotate so that next corner of that central hexagon is on my right hand side, and I'm going to work my way around, folding closed triangle twists at each corner. And since the first one that I folded was right-handed, this next one needs to rotate around in a left-handed way. And you don't need to have that information about, oh, this one's right-handed, that one's left-handed in your head, so much as you need to respect the way that the nearest twist is laying down. And then when you go to fold the next one, you say, okay, I have all of my mountain folds. This one is laying down that way, and I need to make all of these rotationally symmetric. So therefore, this is the way that these other two need to lay down to match this one that's already in place. And squash. And rotate. And you'll notice that we're at this position where by working around, I put us at the top of this pair of stair-step pleats. That was intentional. You may find yourself rotating around and being at the bottom of the stairs. I'd recommend jumping to the top just because it makes the next pleat overlap easier to resolve. So that's a fun fact about folding origami tessellations. It's not like there's a particular set of steps that you absolutely have to follow. It's more of a, we need to get all of these shapes on the paper, and we're going to get them on one way or another. And the reason why I'm doing this pattern on 48 grid divisions instead of like 24 or 32 is because that gives me enough space to demonstrate multiple different ways of repeating this chunk or this pattern. And so these last two, I've rotated it around to my right-hand side because I'm right-handed. And I'm going to set up both of those last two triangles. Again, setting up the mountain folds first, and then figuring out which way those are going to fold over. In this case, they're going to fold over like this, but it's really annoying to try and squash them both while they're both fully set up. So I'm going to leave one of them down flat while I squash the other. And again, that works in either order. Okay, so now the rules for this pattern in particular. And by the way, we get this very nice rhombus outline-y thing from that initial hexagon with spikes that I drew. The rule for this tessellation is that each triangle on two sides goes to other triangles, and on the third side goes to a closed hexagon twist. Specifically, it goes to a closed hexagon twist at tube pleat spacing. So I have this valley fold that is 2 spaces away from the valley under these 2 triangles. And my mountain fold is 1 space further. And I'm going to work on the one on top and fold a pleat overlap through the one down below. And this is a closed hexagon twist, so all of my mountain folds come in to the same point with this one mountain fold already set up from this triangle and the second from the tube pleat. I can identify that center point and start folding my remaining pleats. So I said half of the rules for this pattern, which was that for the triangles, 2 pleats go to other triangles and 1 goes to a hexagon. For the hexagons, the rule is every other pleat goes to triangles and the remaining pleats go to other hexagons. So with those rules in place and recognizing that the triangles are all closed, the hexagons are all closed, they're on the same side of the paper with 2 pleat spacing in between, that fully describes the pattern. And I'm going to take this twist and bop it, grab it, give it a sharp twist around. That happened to be a left-handed hexagon twist. So this is a particularly good tiling if you want to practice both right and left-handed forms of whatever hexagon twist you choose. I should say that if you're using these twists as symmetry positions, then you need to use either a regular hexagon or a 3-fold hybrid hexagon. And now I'm having a vision of the spiky hybrid hexagon in this position, and we'll let that one slide for a bit. Eventually I will do a tutorial on that spiky hybrid hexagon. And so I'm going to look at these 2 pleat overlaps and say, well, both of these pleat overlaps are next to a pleat that went hexagon to triangle, therefore they're pleats that go hexagon to hexagon. And this one looks easier to open, so I'll go there next. I already have 2 pleats coming in, so that defines my center point. And then I can get my remaining 4 pleats in place. And if it's helpful to think it out as you go, this is going to be a right-handed hexagon because it's on a pleat coming from a left-handed hexagon. We always alternate. So I should say the twists at opposite sides of pleats are opposite handednesses, or they rotate in opposite rotational senses. So once I have that hexagon in place, I can bop it and grab it, give it a sharp twist, and then smooth out any irregularities that happened on the way down. And now I have the old pleat overlap that I avoided, a pleat overlap between these 2 hexagons, and a new pleat overlap that looks exactly the same as that one over there. So one way or another, we're gonna be hitting one of those in an unfriendly way. And I want to deal with this overlap between the 2 hexagon twists first. So we just saw, okay, we have this pleat that is going hexagon triangle. This pleat is going hexagon hexagon. So the next pleats around both of the hexagons has to go hexagon triangle. And there's going to be 2 triangles in there, just like there's 2 triangles between these pleats coming together on this other side of these hexagons. So I can open this up. I'm going to open it up so I have this I-beam structure with 2 spaces between the 3-way intersections. I can also read this as I want to have tube pleats out on the outside. And since this was a less friendly overlap, I still have options because I can lift the flap coming from the closed hexagon. But if I were to flip a free pleat, that would tuck this under where I'm trying to squash, which is less fun. So I would rather lift a pleat, fold that hexagon in half, which doesn't add any new creases, assuming I folded everything on grid lines. And then I can squash my 2 new triangle twists, and I have no more pleat overlaps out here. Rotating around, I'm going to then add the next hexagon around. I have 2 pleats going into it, so that defines my center. And then I'm finding the remaining pleats based on that center. And then I can bop it and grab it and give it a sharp twist, get it to lay down. And then, like I saw before, when I have a pair of hexagons, then I have a pleat overlap that needs to be resolved with 2 triangle twists. And this time it was a friendly overlap. So I can flip the pleat going to the edge of the paper over to get a nice surface to squash the first triangle on. And this sequence is going to repeat. So I'm going to find the next hexagon. And that means finding the additional pleats. So I already have a pleat overlap that I'm working from. I'm adding even more pleats. And twisting that hexagon into place. And there you can see what happens if you don't give a sharp twist. It kind of mushes down and around somehow. And then resolving the overlap between the 2 most recent hexagons with 2 triangle twists. So that's the general sequence for this first ring around the triangles in the center. I have 2 more hexagons to do. Here you can see I have a 3rd pleat going straight into that area. And what I can do actually is, since this is a closed hexagon, I can go ahead and set up what I call a half hexagon tube. So I have 3 of the pleats coming into this hexagon twist. And I'm letting those pleats come in and then zigzag 1 spacing. They're zigging back 1 spacing, and then I'm extending the parallel sides of the hexagon out, in a tube until it hits the edge of the paper. And we'll come back to that as a technique in the next ring around the center. Yeah. Okay. And so I get my next hexagon, and then I need to fold my next triangle twists. This time it was a friendly overlap. As you go around, you'll be alternating friendly and unfriendly overlaps. I don't think there's a way around that, but like we saw, even if we have an unfriendly overlap, we can still adjust a different pleat to make it work out more nicely for squashing the triangles. So now I'm turning that half hexagon tube into a full hexagon twist. And I have now 2 pleat overlaps that need their pair of triangle twists. So this is the unfriendly one. And really I can flip either of these hexagons in half to get that flap laying out away from the triangle that I'm squashing. Again, the mirror symmetry works in our favor here. So once I get these 2 triangles squashed, I'm going to show you more precisely where these mirror symmetry lines are going. And the first place that we see mirror symmetry lines is straight through the center in 3 directions. To draw on here, this is going to be a very marked up piece of paper by the end. And anytime we have mirror symmetry lines, they are just as true on the crease pattern as they are in the final folded form. So I'm free to draw these out as far as I like. And if you're folding in real time, this gives you a chance to catch up a bit. So we have these mirror symmetry lines between our meta triangles of 3 triangle twists and a hexagon. We also have these mirror symmetry lines on the 3rd boundary of these triangles, and these I'm not drawing quite as far out because I'm running into pleats that are not perpendicular to the mirror symmetry lines, and I only continue drawing the mirror symmetry lines in uninterrupted spaces and across perpendicular pleats. So we have enough here to say, okay, I see how this pattern repeats forever. And we can say that with the rules that I mentioned before, where each triangle twist has pleats that go to 2 other triangle twists and 1 hexagon, and each hexagon has alternating pleats that go either to triangles or to other hexagons. So that is our first ring around the center, and that's the amount that I showed to fold in Advent of Tess. So for building blocks for strewn about, that's the amount of the tiling that we got onto the paper. Now for folding more repeats of that, we want to take a set of parallel pleats, and then since we're working in this regime of mirror symmetries, it doesn't actually matter if I work from top to bottom or bottom to top. I'm going to choose top to bottom because it just feels nicer to me, and Probably that's like, I'm just used to going around this way. Works nicely for being right-handed. And so I want to use these mirror symmetry rules and also the rules with the pleats and say, hey, this triangle already has one pleat going to a hexagon. That means the next pleat, the free pleat, goes to another triangle. And that triangle is going to be one spacing away because that's the spacing between all my triangles, or I should say the center is going to be one spacing away. So I'm going to go ahead and fold that triangle. And what's interesting about this structure is that it takes, so we can look at this meta block as if it was a set of tiles. So I would have this triangle in its own tile. The hexagon tile is actually taking up more space. And then we have these other triangle tiles at the corners. And so one edge of the tile is this distance, and then this distance again, and this third distance. Each of these meta triangles is 3 tiles wide. And so that presents a problem for the next repeat. Because if I go and do the whole meta triangle in my next repeat, then I'm going to have 3 pleats crossing whatever I'm working on, which is not so pleasant. But there is a shortcut, and it's, okay, let's do just 2 of those spaces and see what I can get done with the triangle and half of the next hexagon. So let's work on that for this ring around the center. That's where I hinted with the half hexagon tubes. Those are going to come into play again, because if I'm doing half of the hexagon, then I only get 3 of the pleats. And notice here that third pleat is running into a 3-way intersection of mountains for another triangle twist. And instead of putting in the rest of the pleats of the hexagon, I can lay that down flat as a half hexagon tube, squash my new triangle twist, and call it a day for now. Then coming around to the next set of parallel pleats, one of the things that I notice is that these 2 pleats are both going to need triangle twists on them, and this one's at the top of the stairs. It's the top layer here. So I'm going to choose to start with that triangle first. I know it's not the pleat at the edge of the set of parallel pleats, but it's going to make my overlaps a little bit nicer. And then I can come in here and put in those 2 additional triangle twists. And then here I have basically the same overlap. Of course, it's the mirror symmetry copy. And I can put in a half hexagon tube where I have 1, 2, and then a third pleat, and that third pleat is going straight to a closed triangle twist that I'll lay down as a 3-way intersection for now until this hexagon business is fully flat. Then I can squash my triangle. And so I'm going around and finishing clusters of 6 triangle twists and putting in half hexagon tubes. So kind of the corners of where I'm working are getting these clusters of triangles. The middle of the edge is getting the half hexagon tube. So moving on to the next set of parallel pleats, I'm going to start moving quite a bit faster so we can get through this whole grid today. I'm looking and I'm noticing, okay, these two pleats for the triangles, this one's the top of the stairs. So I'm going to set up my triangle twist and then resolve the pleat overlap with two more triangles. And if I have a choice, then the one that I want to just be flipped to lay flat is the one without pleat overlaps. And then all those overlaps can already be in the right position. No need to flip them after. And then I come in and say, okay, this next one is a hexagon, but I'm not going to do the whole hexagon quite yet. I'm going to do this half hexagon tube with the next triangle adding on, and then squash that triangle and on to the next set of parallel pleats, where you'll notice as I'm going around, it's alternating whether the top of the stairs is the first pleat I come to or the second. And so we're getting just another layer of our twists. And actually I'm realizing that this is one layer of twists added. So if we look from this point and we add one layer, that brings in half hexagons. And then the next layer would complete those hexagons and bring in the next half hexagon. And the third layer would complete the outer hexagons and bring in more triangles. So we're doing this one layer at a time. And then in the next ring around the center, so after we complete those 3 layers, I'll show you how to fold with the full meta triangle at once. But in this particular pattern, folding one little layer at a time is going to be easiest in terms of pleat management, and in terms of helping your paper avoid crumpling. So I do think that this is a good strategy when you haven't folded much on this tiling before. But one of the things that I'll go into, and this tiling actually is the Tessellation Academy topic for May coming up. One of the things I'll go into there is, what if you're not using closed hexagon twists? What if the half hexagon tube is not an option? Well, then you're a little bit stuck using the full meta triangle to get to your next tiling break. And you can get creative with it and try and set up half hexagon tubes even when they won't eventually become closed hexagon twists. But that may or may not be a possibility depending on what twist you're using. Like the hybrid hexagon twists, you might be able to get away with it. But the open hexagon twists, not so much. Okay, one edge to go. And on this edge, I'm noticing that it's my second pleat that's the top of the stairs and also down below. So I'm just going to jump to this side to work with the more friendly pleat overlaps. And like I mentioned earlier, one of the things that's great about tessellations is you don't actually need to follow specific steps in a specific order. You just need to get all the twists on the paper. And by the way, that thing that I was pointing out with the meta triangles corresponding exactly to the hexagons and triangles six-fold tiling, that is something that I literally just noticed when I went to say it. I didn't realize before that like this distance is the same as this distance. I knew was the same as that distance because they're the same twist edges, but that's really convenient that this pattern matches exactly with the tiling. So directly overlaying the tiling onto the origami tessellation isn't usually possible, but it's convenient for teaching purposes when it is. And so coming around to the end of this micro ring around the center. And now in the next micro ring around the center, I'm going to finish the hexagons that are set up as half hexagon tubes and start new hexagons as half hexagon tubes. So where to start here? I have this pleat that's going to go into a hexagon, but it's not going to be a whole hexagon. And I would have to like actually calculate how far that needed to be. So I may as well start with finishing this hexagon. And I'll make sure that it's rotating all the way around. So it was already pretty much down because it had been set up as the half hexagon before. Just making sure that I was getting it rotated. Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm always happy when people are excited to learn about origami tessellations. So now I had a pleat overlap here. I opened it up. It's going to become a half hexagon tube. The tubey part is going to be pointing out towards the edge of the paper, which means that my third pleat is crossing into the next set of parallel pleats. And actually, it's a good reminder that I am watching the chat. Feel free to put questions or comments in there. And I'll be able to respond to you. So I left a pleat overlap back here, and I'm just kind of leaving it behind because, well, yeah, either I'm going to set it up as two pleats that are spreading, and I may as well demonstrate that. So it's going to become a half hexagon tube, but we don't have that third pleat yet. So I'll just leave it set up as these two pleats going into the closed hexagon, and that's spreading open, removing the pleat overlap and allowing me to freely come down to the next part of the pattern. So here we have a pleat from a hexagon. It's hitting a pleat from a triangle. That is going to be another of our new half hexagon tubes. And we're going to have one of those pleats going down and hitting the current half hexagon tube. So what I did is I erased the top pleat of the tube so that the new pleat could hit, and then I'm letting it act like a pleat overlap on top of the bottom pleat of the tube and all pleats that come after. So I can resolve the new half hexagon tube and then open up this area again to find my two remaining pleats for this hexagon that I get to finish, and then rotate that all the way around. And open up the next pleat overlap. We are going to entirely be working with hexagons here. We will not see any triangles again until the next micro ring around the center. And it's going to go in a sequence of half hexagon, whole hexagon, repeat. Yep. So we have two half hexagons for each whole hexagon that we're finishing in this round. And these whole hexagons are a little bit easier to squash than when they were like up in that tower, because they're already basically down. They just need to be rotated around. So half hexagon, another half hexagon, and with these tubes, we're always directing the tube out to the edge of the paper. And then we can resolve the rest of our whole hexagon. And then another half hexagon. a second half hexagon. Again, I'm moving faster here because we already have the recording of this at tutorial speed. And then the whole hexagon. And make sure that's rotated all the way around. And we're getting there, getting back towards the beginning again. Another half hexagon. And another half hexagon. You might notice that I'm making sure to manage the pleat that goes through and creates the most pleat overlaps before I'm settling other things into place. That is somewhat deliberate. Yeah, so earlier I'm going to read your comment out loud and then respond. The way you analyze the situation step by step is interesting. I have a strong tendency to get confused when there are a lot of folds, particularly for reasons of concentration. Yeah, so one bit of analysis that I'm doing here is I'm putting in a half hexagon, and I've made it all the way around this ring around the center, this micro ring around the center, and I'm back to this place where I have this 2 pleats going into the closed hexagon. And I know that the 3rd pleat, so I'm erasing this pleat going up so that the 3rd pleat can cause the tube, and then I have my other tube up here. So we'll see even more analysis in the next chunk of repeats when I get into like, okay, what if we do all 3 of these micro rings at once? But before we get there, I'm going to finish these half hexagons and get into more triangles again. So I'm going to start with this set of parallel pleats somewhat arbitrarily. They're all equivalent. And start at the top one again, somewhat arbitrarily. And I'm going to finish this hexagon. Make sure it's rotated all the way around. And now I have a hexagon on hexagon pleat overlap that is not going to, well, anytime I have a hexagon on hexagon overlap where those hexagons are connected, that's going to lead to triangles. So I know that those triangles are going to have 2 spaces between their centers because their corners are going to touch. And I'm going to somewhat less than arbitrarily decide that the one that has the pleat overlaps on it is going to be the one I squash first. so that I'm not flipping that plate back and forth more than I have to. And then the second triangle can squash. And now I have this overlap. I want to finish this hexagon. And when I finish this hexagon, that shoots a plate out here, and I'm going to put in a three-way intersection. So I'll have a third triangle twist in that new group. And get these hexagons rotated and squash that triangle. And I'm going to apply that logic all the way around. So I want to finish this hexagon, even though I have this extra plate out here already. And why am I finishing the hexagon first? Because the things happening on that other plate are going to be triangles that feed into this hexagon, and I would rather just finish the hexagon and then be able to put two triangles on this overlap. And now I have an overlap between two connected hexagons. That means more triangles. Two spaces between triangle centers. And I'm going to lift this plate going back into the hexagon so that I have an easier space to squash on, then put it back to squash the second triangle. Good morning, Zach. Glad you could join us. And I'm finishing this half hexagon tube into a full hexagon, and that is running a plate back towards my cluster of triangles that I'm turning into a three-way intersection that I will get to lay down flat as soon as this hexagon is done doing its thing. And now I have this plate that will be going to triangles and the next half hexagon tube, so I will finish the hexagon. And then I have my overlap here. And that was a less friendly overlap, so I'm going to flip the plate going back to one of the hexagons to provide a nicer squashing surface. And I've got a decent amount of border here, but I'm going to double check in the pattern before I go and fold the next ring around the center, just to see. So I counted out the spacings, and I would have been too short on this one if I did 32, which makes me start to suspect that maybe I'll be short with the next ring around the center on this grid, but I'll double check. And I'll show you as I'm checking. And working my way around. Making sure the hexagon is fully rotated. And by the way, you can take this pattern and then do variations on the underlying structure. Like the version in Fujimoto's book, which, by the way, all of his books, all of his self-published books, that is, are open source now. And you can go to the CFC website, CFC origami, forget if it's .com or .org. Let's see. It's .com, cfcorigami.com, and then go to the page on Shuzo Fujimoto, who not only developed twist-based origami tessellations, but also the hydrangea and clover patterns. And then you can look through all of his self-published books. You'll see specifically they're on links that start with archive.org. So that's a fun resource to go through. And Michael Kosmolsky has a whole spreadsheet database kind of thing going on with everything that Fujimoto ever published. So that's also a great resource to look through and see, like, how old are these patterns really? So we're coming around. I have 2 more sets of parallel pleats in this ring around the center. So I finish a hexagon, then I go and finish the triangles in the pleat overlap that it left behind. And in this case, the pleat overlap in front of it. And then I start the next hexagon. So it's basically finish a hexagon, figure out if it needs any triangles, move on to the next hexagon, finish the hexagon, figure out if it needs any triangles, put in the triangles if needed. Which, frankly, is kind of similar to how I fold the hexagons and triangles 6-fold tiling, but it's a little bit more predictable, more regular, and that one is add 2 triangles for each new hexagon. So the benefits of understanding how the shapes are connected is not only can you see what to do next, but you can start to create more general rules. Like I was talking about with, okay, I just folded a hexagon. Now I need to look around and see where I need to put triangles. or I just set up, or like the micro rings in this structure, where the first micro ring I was doing triangles and setting up half hexagons. The second micro ring, I was finishing the half hexagons that were already set up and setting up new half hexagons. And then this third micro ring, I'm finishing all the half hexagons and whatever triangles are needed around them. And those are all things that we're getting from the tiling. The other thing you can do when you understand the tiling is design new patterns. And we're about to see, because I just got to the end of this ring around the center, you can organize your patterns. So I'm going to bring up my file system, and there we go. So in this file system, I have everything organized by tiling, and I'm able to go in and say, okay, hexagons and triangles threefold, that's here. And I'm going to go ahead and say, well, the pattern I'm working on is disintegration, and I can bring up the crease pattern just like that. And then I can look in the crease pattern and say, okay, I started there in the center. How far can I get with 48 grid divisions, which is 24 out from the center? So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, I was in the center here, 18, 20, 22, 24. Oof, I'm not going to reach that next tiling break with this amount of grid. Okay, so now I know that, and I can come back and say, well, how do I want to finish this? I can do it a little bit more, or I can stop it here. I'm gonna start by doodling on the rest of my mirror symmetry lines while I think about this. And I did say that I would show how to do that full ring. They don't have the grid for it at the moment. So I'll show as much as I can of that. It just won't get as far as I might otherwise. But I can draw quite a few more mirror symmetry lines now that I've gotten another whole ring around the center. And That one I didn't draw out to the edge. Interesting. Okay, so if I were to go for the whole chunk at a time, I would be adding on a triangle and going ahead and squashing that triangle. And then a full hexagon. So with the micro rings, this would have been a half hexagon tube. But we're going for the full hexagon. And we are getting extremely close to the edge. And then squash that triangle. And then resolve the overlap that needs two triangles. So I'm always resolving things that are closer in to my working area. And then this needs a hexagon. And I'm really close to the edge, so I'm really working to not tear the paper right there at the edge. And it's sending a pleat down into this area that is going to be a half hexagon for now. So we're setting up just these half hexagon pleats so that I can finish this hexagon and resolve the triangles between these two hexagons. Which is enough to get a smooth border in these mirror symmetry lines. And then coming down in here, I would resolve this hexagon into a full hexagon and put in a three-way intersection down below. And squash that triangle and squash the two triangles on this overlap. And that would get me to a stopping point with this end of things. Now, with this amount of grid, we're not going to see the more chaotic stuff that's going to happen as I continue on around, particularly like out in this corner. But we do see that when we're trying to do the whole chunk at a time, we go the whole way out to the next mirror symmetry line. And so we would do that chunk out this side and then this side. It's a lot easier on this pattern to do that because we're using closed hexagons in all the hexagon positions, because we're using all the twists on the same side of the paper. Where it gets more challenging is what I'm going to teach in the Tessellation Academy advanced lesson, where we're doing building blocks on a 32-fold grid, which is that Advent of Tess pattern. So definitely make sure to check out Tessellation Academy if you aren't already in it. I know at least some of you watching are already in Tessellation Academy. And this is going to be a really great topic next month. And I'll just go ahead and bring out those patterns. So one of them is a very close relative of building blocks where we still have the mirror symmetry, but we use open triangle twists. Oh, and I never showed the back side. So it looks like this cool weave thing going on where we've got these little buttons, we've got these hexagons formed with hexagon twists at the corners, and that spreads throughout the entire paper. So this is the beginner lesson for Tessellation Academy next month, and so slightly different effect. You would get stronger backlighting on these narrower sections, and then building blocks with more repeats, getting those hybrid hexagons and some of the hexagons on the other side. But yeah, there's a lot of different patterns that use this tiling, and I'd consider it a fairly underexplored tiling. One of the things that I'll be talking about in the theory and design session is there's actually two different ways to think about designing patterns in this tiling. One is finding meta triangles where the three pleats from one match up with three pleats from another, whether that's the same chunk or a different chunk. And then another way to think about it is picking your set of triangles, and that you can decide to be centered on a grid intersection, which is very convenient, and then picking your hexagon and then using the positions of threefold rotational symmetry to determine the third hexagon. So a bunch of different things to think about when it comes to design on this tiling. I hope that you are able to take this idea and run with it. Go ahead and fold as many repeats as you want. It looks like 64 divisions would be a particularly good place to land for that next set of repeats. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what y'all fold. Go ahead, tag me at Gathering Folds on Instagram. That's the easiest way to show me photos of what you've made. I also have a email list and a Discord server, and if you're on the email list you get an invite to the Discord server, and there you can share your photos with more people who are also learning to fold origami tessellations. So happy folding, everyone, and definitely share and let me know what you folded from this tutorial. All right, happy folding, y'all. Have a good one.